Good morning, everybody. It's my pleasure today to welcome Dr. Richard Thurlow from the Waipuna Hospice. Richard's been working at the hospice for 15 years now, and the majority of that time as the CEO. I've invited Richard this morning to come and speak with us because, as we appreciate, come October, we've got a referenda as part of the election that introduces to us a choice about the Assisted Dying Act or bill that has now become part of our landscape politically and socially. Many of us have concerns about this bill because it creates for us a whole new storyline in respect to how people die. And as Christians, of course, we see that dying has always been part of God's order, God's plan, and God's timing. So welcome, Richard. It's a real pleasure to have you here today.
Thank you, Craig.
I suppose the big question for me is, as a member of the hospice community, taking care of people in their last days, what is it that concerns you about this act?
Well, first of all, Craig, thanks for inviting me along.
Pleasure.
It's great to be able to talk to you about this End of Life Choice Act, as it's called. We have great concerns around this act from a perspective of where hospices provide care. So our main tenet of our care is we neither hasten nor postpone death.
Right.
That's our one of our guiding values for hospice and palliative care. And because of that tenet, we actually find that the End of Life Choice Act is totally non-compatible with our mode of care. Mm-hmm. And because of that, hospices around the country are taking advantage of a new interpretation of this act before it's even been finally acted upon or being made possible through a conscientious objection declaration, which was made in the High Court recently. So what that allows organisations to do who have values that don't meet the conflict with the End of Life Choice Act, they have the right to conscientiously object from providing those services.
So as a hospice, you went to the High Court to push back on the bill as it currently is?
Yes.
Yeah.
So Hospice New Zealand, which is our parent body, went to the High Court to get a declaratory judgment around the options of conscientious objection. That whole section was actually proposed as an amendment to the Act while they were debating through the third reading, but it was rejected by the author of the bill, or the proposer of the bill, David Seymour. And so we took that next step further because we wanted clarification, because it's not very clear in the Act.
So without that clarification and without that protection, you may have found yourselves in a position where you were legally obligated to assist people in dying.
Yes.
And you wanted to remove yourself from that well, I suppose them forcing your will on that.
Yes. We've surveyed our staff, and the majority of staff are against this this act. One important thing to note here is that this act is a law already. It's just waiting for the general public to vote yes or no. Okay. And it's a bit like a coin toss. It is a bit like, I'm not sure many people realise that they're voting for a law that will happen. It's not a case of we're voting to say to the government, we would like you to now make a law. The law's made. And because of that sort of switch, we're really trying to encourage people to research this, look into the Act, read the Act. It's not very long. It's 37 pages long. Yeah. The Australian Act is over 140, I think, pages long. Yeah. And it says a little bit about how many controls there are in it, personally. And doesn't mean to say that good laws are long laws, but sometimes long laws need to be long for the control aspect of those acts. And also think about the fact that this is a permissive law. A lot of laws say don't do something. Yeah. This law says you can do something, and it changes the Crimes Act. And effectively, you're taking someone's life, so they have to put all these other options or ops into the other acts that it affects. Right. And one area where we think we are concerned as well is that this is the start. This is the start of the Act. In the original proposed, before the third reading, proposed wording, it included everybody who had a suffering terminal condition. And there was concern that disabilities could be involved in that. So the disabilities, not terminal disabilities, when they're less than a year to live, I think, or 6 months to live. What they did do was put in, you must suffer from a terminal condition, and that took the disabilities out for now.
Right.
There's another clause in there about have to be over 18. And all these boundaries could be challenged in the court later under Human Rights Act, Bill of Rights Act. And that's actually what we've seen in some other countries where the act has finally crept. We call it's been called the slippery slope. We've started calling it the logical progression. Yeah. Because it's what happens. People think, well, why can't I? Yeah. And that's when and all these permissive
So
laws.
that thin end of the wedge means that now this legislation is available to be tinkered with, whereas it wasn't before. It just allows it to slip down that slope, as you say. Yeah.
So you've pushed the gate ajar. How wide will it get? Permissive laws are like that. Restrictive laws, it's hard to say, no, you can't do it anymore. But this says we can do it, but actually all these people are excluded at the moment. Yeah. And with human rights legislation, it's people can challenge that. Yeah. And that's where it can get very muddied in the future, because that will form case law, which will change the law.
Right. Yeah.
And that's a concern for us in the years to come. But really, what is really sad is that we're focusing on a law to allow medical practitioners to take someone's life who's trained in their life all their careers to help people. Now they're killing people, which is a massive change to their ethics. Yeah. And also we're looking at this act in terms of how this affects our care. So we will continue to support all patients who need specialist palliative care. Yep. We will not turn people away if they opt for euthanasia. We just won't be providing those services either by our staff or within our organisation buildings and things. So that will be something that the patients will be alerted to up front should this become enacted.
I think that provides a tremendous amount of security for the public too, Richard, because the hospice is obviously a place where people go to spend their last days. And if they had any fear that someone was going to take control at some level of the outcome or timing of that outcome, that would cause them undue concern. So it's really encouraging to hear that hospice is in a position now to remove itself from being obligated to administer what would be the ultimate blow for a person's life, bringing them, killing them.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think as well, the Hospice New Zealand board have come to this position, which is we want hospice to be a place of safety. Yes. Not just the building, but our services into the community, into patients' homes. We're looking after over 250 patients in their own homes at any one time. Wow. We have 6 beds at the hospice. Yeah. So it sort of says where we put a lot of our resources into the community. And every single one of our staff potentially will have to be able to have a conversation around the End of Life Choice Act and the details within it, because it will be raised by families and patients. And so that is going to add another pressure on our staff. So to be able to say, actually, here is who you need to talk to. We'll continue to support your care, but we won't provide that service. Yeah. One other aspect we are worried about, and it comes from, as we all know, their families aren't perfect. Families have their ups and downs. They have their tensions. They have that distant uncle who they never really speak to. There is also the potential for significant coercion in this bill. The proponents of the bill say that the doctors will be able to detect coercion. I'm not so sure. There's a series of meetings that the GP, the medical practitioner, and the patient will have with their family support as well, where they're meant to be trying to look at that. Yeah. Well, that's okay, but bear in mind, in a law court, it can take 2 to 3 weeks of evidence to prove coercion. Wow. Yeah. So we're trying to do something in that 10, 15 minute doctor consult time, which I don't believe is possible. Trying to discern someone's motives when they're presenting a deeply concerned response to somebody who's dying. Yeah. The last aspect of this is equity of access. So we believe that at the moment it's very hard to have equitable access for palliative care across the whole of New Zealand, especially in our far rural areas. Sure. It's going to be the same for the End of Life Choice Act and assisted dying. It's going to be very hard for that GP who's a rural-based GP to opt out even though he may want to,
because he's the only
one
practitioner
there.
in town.
Yeah. And they also, if they do conscientiously object, then who does? So we see this as it's going to be very much more expensive than I think people think in terms of government. It's actually going to be polarise the healthcare community.
Yes,
there's going to be those for and those against, and it also confuses our medical ethics as well. Yeah. So it's a significant change, and it's more than a coin toss.
Richard, over the years, palliative care has grown in respect to its ability to help people in their last days. You mentioned to me a while ago that we can't compare someone's experience of dying now to what it might have been 30 or 40 years ago. And sometimes those old stories are driving an emotional response to this end of life choice bill. What would you say to that as someone who's in this community and sees people going through their last days?
There's a couple of facts and one fact, one story. First fact is Waipuna Hospice is 30 years old this year. The first 5 to 7 years it was a volunteer-only service.
Right.
And then we got our first nurse.
Okay.
And it's only in the last 11 years that we've had really good palliative care specialist support. We've had periods of palliative care specialty and medical specialty, but the last 11 years, and that's been significant in terms of management of pain, nausea, all those symptoms that people are frightened of, and also helping patients with we've got a larger psychosocial team than we had when I started 15 years ago. We had one social worker and nearly one counsellor.
Okay.
Now we've got a team of 5 counsellors and 3 or 4 social workers. Forgive me and we have a chaplain and all those wraparound services that help
with the families
with that journey, so that they have the supports they need. And the other part of the story I want to tell is that recently a nurse retired. She became a nurse at 17. She retired at 70. So she'd been a long-serving nurse, and the last 15 or so years she was with us. And she remembered when she was a junior nurse, trainee nurse, that that when someone had a terminal condition, they were put at one end of the hospital in a ward, and not many of the RNs would go down there. They'd send the junior nurses down there because it was hell. Yeah. It was really rough. It was hard. Yeah. They didn't understand pain, real true pain relief. They didn't have the medications or the procedures or the protocols. Over that time, palliative care has gone from there to where it is now. And she said she looks back, and I asked her she should write a biography because it would be fascinating. She looks back and sees that difference. And she said where we are now is so much better place.
Wow.
And there's one line that the sort of founder of modern hospice, Dame Cecily Saunders, says, and that is, she's since deceased now, but she died now. But she was a fantastic advocate for palliative care. Her famous quote is, "You matter because you are you." And that's what we're trying to instill in people when we provide services. It's very specific to the person. There's not one size fits all. It's needs based. It's patient needs based. So we're trying not to put upon anybody, well, this is what you should do at this stage. It's what are you comfortable with doing at this stage. So it's patient led. And when we have laws that come in to allow patients to choose something, maybe on a slightly, if you have a rough day, for instance, would you then say, can I eat it? The law says the doctor must, so he must now move it on. So it's not a case of saying, let's have a conversation about that first. Maybe he has to straight away.
So any move towards an assisted suicide is not just simply a linear process where someone anticipates it from way out.
No.
The difficulty is someone could, like you say, have a bad day. They say, I've had enough. Next week they could be doing well.
Yes.
But the things that we've already put in motion.
Yes.
That's really disturbing, isn't it?
Yeah, and you know, the authors of the bill say it's safe. It's got lots of controls. It's been well written in their words. I know that when we did the judicial review, the judge did say on several occasions it's not clear. It's not clear.
Yeah.
So if that's a High Court judge doing that, then it's not clear.
Yeah, it's got holes you drive a truck through.
Yeah, you know, we're not sort of politicising the fact that we shouldn't have more of a debate about this, but we're not happy with that law, and we feel that certainly it's interesting. It's been put at the healthcare door. When you think about most. After someone dies, most of the actions after that are legal. Okay. So should this be a Ministry of Justice action? So should we be training legal people to actually perform the act of assisted dying? Because it is a switch. After that point, everything becomes legal documentation. Right. We'll carry on helping the family cope with their grief, which we don't really know what that's going to look like because it's a planned sudden death. It's a suicide, but it's planned. It's going to be very confusing for families. So lots of things that we're grappling with because we will be picking up pieces with the families. Yeah.
So Richard, come election day, people are going to go into that ballot box and have a choice.
Yes.
Their vote counts, doesn't it?
Yes.
And that's probably the most important thing we can say to people who are looking forward and concerned about not just this bill, but in one sense, this sort of the direction of the nation socially, and so therefore encouraging people to get out there and express their Christian faith, their ideals in that ballot box is a really important thing.
Yes,
isn't it?
Yeah, and I think as well we're slightly putting the cart before the horse with this act. We need to think about whether we're happy with the way we're investing in healthcare, and we also need to be bolder in having conversations about death and dying. You know, the joke is there are two certainties in life: death and taxes. But it is significant that we talk much more about taxes than we do about death.
Yes,
everybody's going to die.
That's right,
and it is a very sad point in the survivors' lives. We don't really know how sad it is for the person who's died because we can't talk to them.
That's right.
You know, it's a hard journey. I'm not saying it's easy. But we pride ourselves on really trying to help people with everything that they can get so that we can make that journey as comfortable as possible.
Well, Richard, we as a community truly value who the hospice are as a community. We value your length of service down there because that's created continuity in an environment where continuity really counts. Because your ability to take that long view and take the history with you, particularly in times like this. And so I know I can speak on behalf of many and say we're really grateful for yourself being there. You're a trusted, wise man in our community who's been able to lead an organisation that has made a tremendous difference in the lives of thousands and thousands of people in the Bay of Plenty. So thank you for giving us some of your time today. We really appreciate that, and we just trust with you that as a nation we can make a really good decision and trust that we can continue to respect the life that God has given us in the way that He'd have us. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Thanks, Craig. Cheers.